All right, so what you see in front of you is the final product of the PM viewport. It's representative of a full year's of assets PM, and it's a challenge to interpret at this stage because you've got no background on it. What I hope to be able to do is bring you through to this point again so that next time you see it, you'll have a full understanding of what you're looking at and that it'll make more sense. The components of it will make sense. Rough order of this presentation, I'm going to focus on this for the next 5 minutes or so and break down each of the general areas that you're seeing, give you some basic information on it. There's a good chance it'll feel overwhelming at first. We'll have a break after that, and then we'll start from the very beginning and work our way back to this point. Some things that I'm aware of as far as presentations go. The text can be difficult to see based on your projectors. I will zoom in during this first stage. I'll try to focus on some of the minutiae just to show you what it's actually about. But for the most part during this presentation, the goal is to focus on the big picture of things. It is relatively a simple concept. It's a little difficult to execute from a development standpoint in creating this tool, and also to present through DCS or any sort of a video footage, because it's difficult to respond to what concerns or questions people have. So that having been said, we'll be breaking up this particular presentation into segments, 5 to 15 minutes in each segment. These are all pre-recorded segments, and then in between them we'll be talking about questions and answers. I'll be taking your questions, or somebody on my behalf will be doing so. And we'll get our best answers to you either immediately or take some time to give you a better one if needs be. But that having been said, I'm going to start to focus in on this a little bit and describe to you first about the philosophy. About a year and a half ago, we were given guidance to take each of our shops' required PM and to break up the map of our bases by zones, and to make sure that those zones represented roughly equal annualized hours throughout the year. While that was a great way to get started in balancing our schedules, it was recognized that that wasn't sufficient for a completely balanced schedule. So that's why at JBear we decided to develop this tool to help ourselves with balancing this, and it quickly became clear that this was not just going to be an issue with our base, but generally speaking with all bases enterprise-wide. So that's the basic philosophy behind this tool. We want to be able to provide a way of visualizing or having a year-long perspective on your PM schedule, and by doing so it allows you to kind of make decisions about what assets are PM'd. Now what I'd like to do next is describe to you what you're seeing on the screen. Again, this is going to be an overview. I hope not to get too much into the weeds on this, but it'll help you in understanding where we're headed with each of the steps that we're about to take. On the left, you'll see that we have some information that's pretty specific. It's utility type stuff, configuration, calculators, and that's all that at this point you really need to know about. So we'll set that aside and we'll focus on the right. Here we have our primary piece of information that we're concerned about. This represents a full year of our PM for either a shop, for a contractor, for a team within the shop, for any number of situations or variables that you might consider. Across the bottom of the chart, you see that we have dates. These dates each represent the Monday of a particular week. That means that each of the bars that you see are representative of the total number of hours of PM estimated for that week. In order to provide a point of comparison, the red dotted line represents the available man hours that we have. So it stands to reason that where the bars exceed the threshold of available hours, they go above that red dotted line, we're going to have too many hours scheduled for what our shop can reasonably maintain. Looking to the right, you'll see that we have a lot of information that's being displayed on this graph. I'd like you to focus primarily on these solid blocks of color. These represent your standard PM frequencies. The red dotted line, as I said before, are the available hours. There's something called the monthly mark, and we'll see that in action later on. And then we have another category of bars. These do not have clear borders. They're not solid blocks. Instead, they represent, as you might guess, the extra annual type PM. The second graph that you see below has the same peaks and valleys, except that each of the bars is divided into different categories. For the top graph, we have frequencies, as I just covered. But for the bottom graph, we have zones. By combining the facility information from your assets with the zone information developed between the R&O section and your shops, you can use the same tool to both balance your frequencies and your zones. On the right, the legend has several zones allowable, though in most cases only 3 or 4 are needed. Again, you see the available hours and the monthly marker, but what's more, at the bottom, you see that instead of, as we had with the previous graph, we hash out any of the extra annual hours that apply to these zones. This all makes much more sense in practice. But as a brief overview, you should have enough information to generally understand that these charts represent a year's worth of PM, and that by looking at them, either one, the other, or comparing both, we can move hours around by moving dates associated with assets and thereby shifting PM throughout the year. Now that covers it for the brief description of what you're seeing in these charts. And again, we'll come back to this point, except next time we'll have the entire construct benefiting our understanding. The last topic that I'd like to cover before the end of this segment is how we use this information to make decisions. By looking at these graphs, I can clearly determine that 1 week, in this case the 2nd of March, has far too many hours to be accomplished and is not nearly balanced when compared to the rest of the year. When I look at the bottom graph, I see that I may have an opportunity here to shift my hours based on zones. If I perform PM on some Zone 1 assets a week earlier and some Zone 3 assets a week later, I may be able to bring this peak down in line with the rest of the year. In this way, we can achieve a relatively even distribution of hours throughout the year, but it doesn't answer the issue of where our hours are well above our threshold or where they're well below. At the very end of today's presentation, we'll get into the mitigation strategy and how to resolve that. The fact is, there's no way to perfectly balance your PM schedule unless you have too many personnel to do the job. That means that what we need to do is strategize the way that we approach our PM so that some assets we perform exactly on time, and some assets we use Tririga's 2-week leeway to let us perform PM a couple of weeks late. All of that is a conversation for the very end of it. Hopefully at this point you've got enough information to feel comfortable with what you're seeing, and we can now take a break for questions and comments, and at which time we'll follow up with the second segment of this presentation, actually populating this tool.